Ah, when life gives you apples. Hello.
I don't think
Happy
that's how that
Monday.
goes. Mm-mm.
Well, we are so lucky we have Bena Shklyanoy today. We have Bena Shklyanoy, and she's going to change the world for me personally.
So Deanna, part of our backpack community, Deanna Shoss, recommended her, and I heard her story. Look, it turns out that she has looked at her family's history all the way back to like the 1850s in pre-Soviet Russia. And it's just an amazing story. So we're going to hear all about it today. It's really inspirational. So I'm excited about that. Before we do that, though, I have to show you one thing. You haven't done anything wrong yet, so you haven't earned this, but I'm just excited to like debut it.
And out comes the yellow card for Brogan, and Gorgone just says, "You're going down, my friend." Kaboom!
Oh my gosh.
I know you didn't deserve it, but I couldn't wait. I mean, it could be minutes before you say something inappropriate. Hi, Elaine. Hi, Chloe. So welcome to the Backpack Show, where we bring you success insights from unusual places. And this was my first introduction to Bena Shklyanoy, so I know it's probably yours as well. But she was born in Kiev. We're going to talk about her origin story, emigrated to the US with her husband and children in the 1970s, and fearful that her family history would be lost, she went and researched it all the way back to the 1850s and turned it into 2 plays. It's just an amazing story. So we're going to talk all about it.
It's a lot to dig into today. Backpack Show.
Elaine likes the yellow card. So that is Tim Kitzrow of NBA Jam fame. He's going to be coming back on December 3rd. And he's given us a few really, really juicy tidbits of audio to use.
We have some incredible audio files for no good reason, just entertainment and love and joy.
He's amazing. Yep. He's amazing. So Bena, let's introduce Bena.
Yep. Bena Shklyanoy is coming on. So much to ask, so many things to learn. This is going to be a good show. What's fun about it is to talk about, an immigration experience, to talk about Soviet Russia and Ukraine, to talk about back when that was all one thing, and so much more. And there's just so many questions I have to ask. So let's bring on Bena Shklyanoy. Hello, how are you?
Hello, good morning.
And I have to point out that Bena is very modest, because anybody else would call themselves a playwright with 2 plays out there having been performed. But you're like, no, I just co-wrote them. Everybody else would be like, it's all me.
True.
It was me. So tell us about your story then. So you born in Kiev. I mean, you don't have to tell us all the details, but how do you wind up being a playwright or a co-playwright here in the United States?
Well, the connection is not really obvious. It's definitely not obvious to me, because that came at the tail end of my story about my origins. But yes, I was born in Kiev, and so were, my parents were not born there, but they lived there. So I lived there, went to school, got married, started a family, all in Kiev. And then an opportunity, the first ever opportunity to emigrate from the Soviet Union presented itself, and we took it. And that was in 1976.
And that was part of the Save Soviet Jewry program?
That was part of the Save Soviet Jewry movement. And of course, back there in the Soviet Union, we didn't know about the movement. We just knew that there were people here who were fighting to allow Jewish people to emigrate from the Soviet Union.
How did the whole process work? And what was it like? Because I assume this had to be quite a secretive kind of experience. What was that like living through, and how was it to try to keep all that going?
Everything was a secret. You couldn't really show or say much of what you were thinking outside of your family or trusted friends. But we and everyone else learned about immigration, also not from official sources. There was no such thing. For a long time, no one even knew that that opportunity existed. People found out word of mouth. And we found out from my husband's friend, who I don't know how he found out, but he emigrated a few years before us. And then you had to, in order to immigrate, you had to prove that you had relatives in Israel. Why in Israel? Because logically, at least from that point of view, logically, Jewish people had relatives in Israel. No one did. So you had to get an invitation from those relatives. Since you could not really correspond with abroad and didn't have relatives, that presented a slight problem. So again, it was all word of mouth. Somehow you gave your names to people who were.
Oops, I think Bena froze for a minute.
Somehow you put your names out to get the invitation. And when you got the invitation, some people never did because it depended sometimes on your mailman. If your mailman didn't like you, he would not deliver it.
Wow.
So, and you are not going to go and complain. So, and it took us 2 years. There were some people that got it in 2 months. So it's not predictable because you didn't know who it was coming from. But eventually it was coming from Israel. It was coming from some unknown name. And since we were giving out our name so many times, we got 7 invitations. And we had to just pick a name that was easier to pronounce. Because we had no idea who these people were.
Can we talk about the why, Bena? So this is quite a lot to go through. What was life like for you that you needed to leave?
Well, at that time, actually not many people were leaving because we all lived exactly the same way. Everyone lived almost in identical ways, professionals and people who worked, for example, in stores. Very differently, but each of these groups lived nearly identical to each other. So it was your perception. A lot of people said, I finally got my apartment. I have a good job. And my child goes to college or something like that. So why would I want to leave? Because we really didn't have any information at all. The only information we had was from the official media that were saying that almost 90% of the American population, capitalist country populations, is homeless and is sitting around manholes to warm up in the winter. These were the pictures that we saw. And we heard, of course, the Voice of America. It was half jammed in other BBC and other programs like that. But it was difficult to understand. I mean, not difficult. It was not their fault that it was difficult to understand. It was just difficult to imagine that. So you pretty much just made that decision by thinking it cannot be worse because you're Jewish. You will not be able to go to the university that you want to. You will probably, and it was getting worse and worse, you will not be able to get a job that you want. You will, and that was official more or less. It was not official because you could not complain. If you complained, you heard the Soviet Union does not have anti-Semitism. Then, of course, you had neighbors who would call you all kinds of names and your children too. So that was enough. Some people didn't care. Many people didn't care. And I heard from many people, and I can't blame anyone, like, what do you care? If you have to lie from, outside your house, what do you care? It doesn't matter. It mattered to us. So that was pretty much the reason. It wasn't, in our days, it was not a material reason at all because we had no idea what we were getting into. And the only thing that all the women at that time, most women were thinking that they would do house cleaning and, babysitting, stuff like that. And men, don't laugh, men thought that they would be longshoremen.
Longshoremen.
Because in the Soviet Union, it was like the dirtiest and the easiest job to find. And that's all. And these were, many of them, professionals, people who became professionals in the United States or in Israel or in Canada.
So this is a pure leap of faith on your part. You have no idea what it's actually like.
Absolutely zero information. Absolutely.
Before we go into where you go, I want to read just a little something I read on your website, which is from 1946 timeframe. So again, you've collected all this history back to the 1800s. So I just want to read just a tiny bite of something I got from 1946 in Kiev. And so what it says here is first off, one of the things it says is that this new room was 140 square feet. It was on the 4th floor of a 5-story building. No elevator. Let's be serious. The window looked out on the paved and sunless, well fenced in by the backs of 4 buildings. So it was dark and dreary and miserable. The neighbor, who was a lieutenant colonel, was ordered to relinquish that room to Avram and was left with 3. So the room had 5 walls, 2 of them connected under an obtuse angle. The triangle made for handy storage, which is, good for you for being optimistic. Listen to this right here, and this makes you wonder, why couldn't you or wouldn't you have thought of living anywhere else? Every few days, Polina spread the onions stored there for the winter over a newspaper on the floor to pluck with any signs of rotting for immediate use, and she did the same with the potatoes. These sacks sat under Avram and Raquel's bed. So, it is a small room in a very dark home. This was just one of the living conditions you found yourself under. You had to be dreaming of bigger places, better places.
No. We were not dreaming because we didn't have any examples of better places. Everyone lived the same way. Someone had 140, someone had 80, someone had 200 square feet, someone had 2 communal neighbors, someone had 10, but it was still the same thing. You couldn't dream of something you can't imagine. So it was like dreaming of going to the moon.
So when you came to the United States, you brought your family with you, your children, your husband, but all the rest of your family, they stayed behind. Is that right?
Well, I'm an only child, and so was my husband. So we didn't have any siblings. My mother-in-law came with us. My parents stayed back. They thought in case we did not receive a permission, then we would pretty much be by the law. So they would be helping us. As soon as we left, they applied and they joined us in 7 months in Chicago.
So what prompted you then to go back and look at your family's history, like beyond your parents, your grandparents? What led you to go all the way back to pre-Soviet Russia?
Well, I grew up with my grandmother, who was a storyteller by nature. And I didn't realize it, of course, while I was living with her, but I was used to hearing stories, constant stories. And then, of course, she passed away and I grew up and it didn't matter, it seemed. But then when my mother died, and I realized that in spite of telling all these or some of these stories to my children constantly, they did not take them seriously. They did not know anything. And I realized that I don't know enough already, but after me, my children will not know anything, and they will think, why didn't I ask, like we all do? Mm-hmm. So when my mother died, I decided that while I still remember at least these stories and have all these pictures and know who is on those pictures, I better put all that together. So my first idea was to just put on paper or on Word, put my story together, collect all the pictures, scan them, and that's it. But as soon as I started working on that, I always mention who the parents of that person were. Mm. I wanted to learn a little more about those parents or siblings, find out more about them. And it was like, it just went by itself pretty much. Until
like
I ran
led you
out
along.
until I ran out of information.
Chloe from Scotland has a question for you, Bena. She wants to know, do you think that it was better or worse living in the Soviet Union because you didn't have that dream, or because you thought, well, this is it? Better or worse?
Oh, that's a good question. Not easy to answer, or maybe it doesn't even have an answer. It's when you are, it's my conclusion that when a person is ignorant but doesn't know that he or she is ignorant, it's easier to live, because you hear that everything is okay around you and you believe it. If you start asking questions, if you have doubts, it becomes very difficult. It becomes impossible. If you don't have a way to get more information to see if your doubts are justified, your questions are even applicable. If you don't have that. That's why we left, because we just felt very, very like in a cage. We wanted to break through. We didn't know what was behind that cage, but we knew that the way we were living was not. We just couldn't live that way. We just couldn't constantly lie, constantly hear lies. No, our children will live exactly the same way. That they were already. My older daughter was 7. She was already beginning to live that way, and that becomes very difficult. So it's very difficult. So it's easy if you don't have questions. It's easy if you don't question anything. It tells you now is not morning, it's dark and night, and you say, oh yeah, sure, why not? And you are happy with that. That's perfectly fine. But if you say, wait a minute, there's light outside, maybe it's not night, then you're in bad shape. Yeah.
So you can't be curious.
Yeah.
When we come back, I'll ask you a bunch of questions about modern Bena Shklyanoy, but I do want to read one more thing from your website that I found, and this is from the 1970s. This is when you've come to Chicago. We assumed that one bedroom meant one room, but the apartment had 2. The one with a door and for some reason no ceiling light was defined as a bedroom, and one without a door and with a ceiling light fixture was defined as a living room. The kitchen was fully stocked with pots, utensils, and dishes. And I'm going to talk about when you get to the grocery store, because you found a supermarket called Jewel. And it says here, enthralled, we weaved through the store, holding hands, afraid to get lost. How would one know how to find anything? And who could memorize the content of the zillion boxes with colorful pictures? Food specifically for pets? You mean American pets didn't eat leftovers of human food? Mine do. And an entire aisle dedicated to their special meals? So there's just so much to cover, and we have to take a very small break and do a little bit of advertising. So we'll bring you right back right after. Don't go anywhere. Everybody else, don't go anywhere. We've got a lot to cover. Bena Shklyanoy from The Apple Doesn't Fall Far, and we have 2 plays that she's written that we're going to dig into and ask.
Can you think of that? The place you've never seen, you have no idea what it's like. All you have to go on is your experience where you are and the hope, the vague hope that something will be better, and you do it.
It's a big world.
Not because it's easy, by the way. It was very hard. So you have to make that decision every single day. I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to keep looking. I'm going to keep putting myself out there and expose myself to potentially, repercussions in Soviet Russia, because I have hope.
We're sponsored by StreamYard. You can make your own show just like this. You can find your own incredible immigration story. You can find an entire history of several families. You can make your own show out of it. See brogan.me/StreamYard. It is so easy.
My grandfather was in the IRA. Shh.
That's another
Irish
old
Republican
story.
Army.
We are sponsored by PubSite, authors who can make an incredible story. There's so much big stuff that you can do out there in this world. We'll put it in a book. And then once you have that book, you can make a website around it with PubSite, pub-site.com, the easiest way to make a website.
The story about my grandfather in the IRA. I'll get myself a website on
pub-site.com. You should do that.
Seriously, it's really, really easy to use. You've got to try it. It is ridiculous. I'm so not a techie person. I'm at best like a half-assed web person, and you can change anything. So go and try it, pub-site.com. If you really don't want to build it yourself, they'll build it for you, even though it's easy and you should do it yourself. But if you don't want to, they'll do it for you for just $499 to have them build you an author website. If you do it yourself, it's $19.99 a month just to have your website on PubSite.
It'll take you a couple hours, but that's all it's going to take you.
That's it.
They're also a sponsor of Person of the Day, which Bena doesn't know this, but every day we give away an apple. So this time the apple probably won't fall that far.
Oh my gosh, that's true. I didn't even think about that.
So we'll bring Bena back out here because, otherwise we'll make shenanigans happen.
Oh, Carol says your writing really makes us relive the moment through your eyes and emotions. And Chloe says the realization might be necessary but hard. It must have been like opening your eyes to an entirely different world.
Oh, yes.
Wow.
So my question into this segment is your plays, I think, came out in 2017 and 2018. It's a very recent thing that these plays are out. True. Yes. Between then and now, between all of when the stories happened and those plays being produced and all that, it was years of work for you, I imagine, to do all the writing, all the gathering, all the questions that aren't easy to find answers, a lot of letters written and all that, to turn it into a piece of written work that someone could use in their own ways after it's left your hands. Do you want to talk for a minute just about that process?
Well, as I said, I'm a co-write, which makes my life much easier. The idea belongs to Kevin Olson, who is a professor in Providence, Rhode Island, and also produces this year, but every year he produces a play, and he became interested with the story when he read the site, and he suggested, it was his suggestion, it would have never occurred to me. And he wrote, he had 3 seasons. There's only one play, and then the second season in Rhode Island, and then one in Chicago in 2018. It was both plays, we edited the play, and then one was at the beginning of 2020, in January, in New York, Brooklyn. It was only one play, the second play. And one of the plays, the one that he caught his attention, the story of family, specifically my grandmother and her siblings, because that's almost the only family I knew, and they influenced me a lot. So, and each of them, there were 7 of them that were left out of a big family, and each of them had a very different life, and because of their different ages, their lives reflected the age, the era that they fell into. So we created that, and it was connected. So I was in that play. It's called And Then What? And I will tell you in a moment why. So it was me being molded, being shaped by that family, essentially. So it was a story of each person told by that person, being in the middle of listening to it and soaking it all in. And the name And Then What, that is also, I'm going to credit Kevin. He called that because I write about it on my site. My grandmother used to tell me, since I remember myself, no matter what I wanted to do, and if it was not something that was any good, she would not tell me not to do it. She would only say, okay, suppose you've done it already. And then what? And then what? I was very angry with her, I remember, as a child, and I was very annoyed because as soon as she said that, I didn't want to do it. And it would annoy me a lot because I would start thinking and realize that something is not really right there. And then when I got older, I started doing it myself, to myself. Before I did anything, and that's all my life, it seems something that seems very logical, very, very, very positive. And then I think about, then what? And I realize that the consequences might not be as positive as what I want to do. So that was one play. And then and it went very well in Rhode Island. My children flew in to watch it, and I was very nervous about it. First of all, because they knew all these stories.
Oh, right.
To them. And then I realized, only then I realized how important it was that I started doing that, because my daughter said, you know what, I heard these stories all my life, and only now I understand what my mother was talking about.
Right, because out of the context, there's so much lost. There's so much lost.
Right.
If there's a sentence,
Right.
it's a tree without roots. There's no structure.
Exactly.
That's one thing I found interesting in sort of reading about the plays, the way that they're summarized on the Amazon site. It talks about the fact that this is, pre-Bolshevik Russia. This covers all the way through the Soviet Union. This covers everything that we couldn't quite imagine, and really literally everything from the pogroms and the violence against Jews and anti-Semitism to not having toilet paper, not having milk, like all the spectrum,
Right.
I was struck by that for two reasons. One is just because this story you're telling might be millions of people's story, but wasn't written for whatever reasons. People weren't brave enough. People weren't diligent enough. People didn't live to tell their story. So you have that. But I was also struck by how much of this also echoes 2020. So here you are, Bena, in Chicago, going, you went through your family, legacy-wise, went through the typhoid fever, typhus plague, and now here you are with a new plague. And what are you thinking when you're watching this all unfold again?
Right. I know.
So what do you see? What do you think when you see this now?
Well, my story is the foundation of the way I look at the world, and it will always be, even though it's been so many years. So when I heard about toilet paper suddenly not available at local stores or even on Amazon, I laughed because I was absolutely positive that it will show up, that I will not have to go back to newspaper squares instead of toilet paper. I was positive because I knew that I live in a country that will make sure the business will make sure that it's only temporary. People who didn't have my foundation, some of my friends were saying, oh my God, what's going to happen now? That's the end of the world. And I had to laugh.
They don't make it to newspaper. They go through
exactly,
the paper's gone, and then the last couple sheets that are stuck to the thing, and they're the cardboard roll is technically paper. It's a long way to newspaper.
Yeah, exactly. So it reminds me of how months after we immigrated, I found a housekeeping job for a lady that I thought was very old. Now I understand was much younger than I am now. And she asked me where I came from. My English was limited. And, I told her as much as I could. And she said, oh my God, I feel so sorry.
Oh, no.
You should go back. United States is falling apart. That was 1977, beginning of 1977. And she started telling me stories that unfortunately I didn't understand them all, so I don't remember. But she was explaining to me how good it was when she was young and how terrible it is now. And she was not even 60 years old. So, and I couldn't understand. I was looking at her thinking, how could she say that if the stores are full of goods and you could work anywhere you want and you don't have to ask permission for a lot of stuff that now seems ridiculous that we have to ask permission for.
Completely different frame of reference, right?
It's a different frame of reference. Yeah.
She had took a lot for granted.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bena Shklyanoy,
Exactly.
thank you so much for sharing so much of this with us. There's just so much to dig into. It's such a wealth of ideas that people just haven't had the opportunity to.
Go check out the plays, everyone, because you can't see plays performed right now, so you're gonna have to read them.
You're gonna have to
Yeah.
read through them right now. So we're going to talk about person of the day really quick because I'm not going to forget it yet again. I'm going to give it to Carol because Carol had a lot of shivers during this whole thing, and there's a lot of personal connection to the story in some ways. So I'm going to give
Sponsored by PubSite, person of the day, pub-site.com.
So anyway, this is
Carol, that gets you an apple.
so much learning, and you know, when we talk about the lack of toilet paper, true story. My grandmother worked in a paper mill, so she made toilet paper, paper towels, and she made missing one, Kleenex that you blow your nose on. And so she never would have let this happen because